will then, I would invite you to keep your questions on the matters on the agendas of the Council meetings today for the dedicated press conferences. Also, I'd like to say that I think many of your colleagues are, in fact, at those Council meetings. So that's it for the Council meetings today.
Welcome two groups of visitors that are joining us today. I'm told that you are 20 journalists coming from Sweden in a visit organized by a representation in Stockholm, and I'll have the pleasure of meeting you later, and 15 journalists from the United States and Canada in a visit organized by the External Action Service. I hope you enjoy your time in Brussels and here with us in the European Commission in particular. That was all from us today. We can now take your questions, assuming there are any, in view of the numerous councils activities that are taking place. Mose, a short question, please.
It's about the Foreign Affairs Council meeting yesterday. I understand there was no formal conclusions issued after that meeting. We only have, I think, the High Representative Borrell's press remarks at the press conference. So I would like to ask about the position, if there is one, on the ongoing war between Hezbollah and Israel. Because in his press remarks he talked about the sustainable ceasefire, but I understand that there is no, of course, international legitimacy for continuing the war in Gaza, but when it comes to Lebanon, Hezbollah, I think the situation is different. So what is your position on that? Thank you.
Peter.
Thank you, Mose. The position of the European Union on Lebanon has not changed since the last EU27 statement on it, issued, I think, during the last week of September during the United Nations General Assembly. It was the EU27 statement issued calling for immediate ceasefire and upholding of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701. This call by all 27 member states followed the call of the leaders of the countries, including the European Union, for the, if you remember, the 21 days long immediate ceasefire. So the position of the EU has not changed. Respect for international law, fulfillment and respect for the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, immediate ceasefire, and of course, very strong and urgent call on Hezbollah to stop shooting rockets on Israel.
Follow-up, Mose.
Yes, thank you, Peter. You referred, say, to the previous statements, and I remember that the EU supported the G7's call for a temporary ceasefire for 21 days, I think, in order to make space or room for negotiations on a political solution. And that seems to contradict the call, if there is such, on an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon, which would, I suppose, leave Hezbollah in power there. After all, I mean, Hezbollah is not only a threat against Israel, but also against the security of Lebanon itself. Thank you.
Peter. The position of the European Union has not changed, and the meeting of foreign ministers yesterday, which was taking place as the regular meeting of foreign ministers, they meet every month. The meeting yesterday reinforced the EU position on this.
Thank you. Any other questions for Peter on the situation in the Middle East? Please only keep your hand raised on Interactio if your question is on this. I see one hand raised on Interactio from Konrad Kramer. Konrad, on this?
Hello, can you hear me?
Well, if it's not on this, let me check first, since I said please don't raise your hand.
I'm sorry.
No other questions, and then we will come back to you. It is not the case, so go ahead, Konrad. Other issues?
I'm sorry.
No
This is a question about migration. Thanks for giving me the word. As President von der Leyen has announced a new system for the enforced return of illegal migrants in a communication with the 27 member states, how will that system be? How will you proceed with this? In accordance with the reform of the EU Asylum and Migration Pact, because there's a schedule for this, for putting this pact into practice, and now the president comes up with this new plan. So will you put in accordance these two strategies?
Let me remind you that what the President has done for the moment is send a letter to the Member States which focuses on 10 points of action for the future, and therefore, obviously, in the context of the new mandate. So you have, on the one hand, the implementation of the agreed legislation, which is the Migration and Asylum Pact, and on the other, the reflection on a certain number of areas. By the way, the very, very first point in the letter that the President has sent to the members of the European Council is precisely speeding up the implementation of the pact. But she says, alongside the implementation of the pact, we need to continue the work in a number of areas, or to start the work in a number of areas. You remember that the Commission has been acting when it comes to migration on two legs, if I can put it that way. One leg is the legislative part, which is the Migration and Asylum Pact and all the regulatory texts and laws which are included in that. And on the other, it is action on a series of practical issues, in particular, for example, action plans on the diverse routes that migrants take to reach the European Union, the external dimension of migration with agreements with partner countries, etc., etc. So we have two legs, and this is what we will continue. The letter is very clear on what are considered the priority areas for action, but now, of course, it is for the leaders to discuss the way forward based on the letter that the President has sent. So it's not today that I can provide you with details on how exactly we'll be moving forward, since this is a document which will be the subject of a conversation with the leaders. Bruno.
I seem to remember a lot of discussions over the years, not least back in 2018, over this idea of return hubs outside of the EU, and in contrast actually to the Albania protocol. These are people who have been in the European Union who are then sent outside the European Union to a return hub, and the Commission was always very negative about it. Yet in this letter, the President of the Commission is saying that's something that can be taken forward, that it's possible. Could you explain what's changed in the meantime, that something that was once not possible, illegal, is now possible and is something to go forward on?
Anita.
Thank you, Bruno. I think we need to start again with the context, and Eric already started in this regard to outline the main priorities of the Commission, but also as highlighted by the President in the political guidelines. You will see a specific paragraph in her guidelines and also in the way she has tasked the incoming Commissioner on Home Affairs in terms of accelerating, strengthening the work on returns. Because indeed, as a part of a functioning asylum and migration policy, those who have no legal right to stay must be returned. And a lot of progress has been made, actually, in this regard. We have an EU return coordinator. We have a high-level return network where the EU return coordinator is working with the member states also to ensure that we optimize the use of Frontex support and that we exchange practices and experiences in this regard. But as you have seen in the letter of the President, despite all of this, we only have 20%, despite of all the progress, of third country nationals that are ordered to leave and have no legal rights to stay on the territory that are actually need to be returned. So it is very clear that still progress needs to be made. This is also the subject of a letter of the Member States addressed to the Commission this May, looking into the possibility of cooperation with partner countries in this regard. And as Eric also has said it right now, this is the subject of this reflection that will be discussed at EUCO.
Follow-up, Bruno.
Yes, thanks for that. But I'm just trying to understand, I know the context, I'm just trying to understand why the Commission has always said to us that sending people from the EU to deportation centres, whatever you want to call them, return hubs, whatever the euphemism is, sending them outside the EU once they've been in the EU is something that's simply not legally possible. That distinction was made when the Commission rather grudgingly accepted the Italy Albania Protocol too. And since you mentioned returns and changing the return directive as actually a QMV of countries do you accept their proposal in the letter, Austro-Dutch letter, that people who are non-cooperation with deportation orders or return orders should be sanctioned, i.e. punished?
So, yeah, Bruno, I think you need to really pay attention, as all of us, on the way you use specific words. Yes, so that's number one. Number two, in terms of what is legally possible or not. So it is currently not possible on the EU to have this option right now. So to make such a model possible, the EU law would need to regulate the forced return to a third country, which is not the country of origin. So in our assessment, the current rules do not foresee this. So this is, however, nevertheless foreseen in the Council position on the draft recast return directive. And once more, in view of the need to reflect on legislative changes, also in view of the letter of member states, this is something that we are currently looking into.
Thank you. Any other questions for Anita on migration? Mose.
Well, I think this question is also related to the issue raised last week about this investigative report by Lighthouse Reports about the forcible return of refugees from EU-funded so-called removal centres in Turkey. And we never got, let's say, your view on that, because the question was then whether it at all was legal to forcibly return refugees to a country, in this case, I mean, Syria, but also Afghanistan, which generally are not considered safe, at least not by United Nations.
No, I'm sorry, Mose. There was a full discussion on the report and the Commission's position on all of those dimensions in the press room after the report came out, and we have nothing to add to that. Any other questions on migration for Anita? That is not the case. I see that Conrad has another question, perhaps. Go ahead. You need to reconnect.
Now you can hear me. I'm sorry. So just a quick follow-up. So this new plan announced in the letter by the president includes the idea of sending people back to third countries, not to their home countries, but to third countries, which will be contracted under new agreements which have to be found.
I believe that the letter is very precise and abundantly clear. This is about creating so-called return hubs in third countries with whom the European Union would have agreements for migrants whose right to stay in the EU has been rejected, while they're waiting to be returned to the country that they came from. Anita, I'm not saying anything wrong. Voila. So that's very, very specific. And I would ask you, Conrad, for our interpreters, if you take the floor again, to please switch on your camera as well. Thank you very much. I see no further hand raised on migration for Anita. Any other questions for us today? Okay, that is it. Thank you very much for your participation, and we will meet again tomorrow.
Thank you.